So now I'd like to introduce Rachel Bennett, who flew in from Boston. She's going to talk to us about cortical visual impairment, and she's the director of the CVI Center at the Perkins School for the Blind.
Hi, everyone. Feel free to shake out. I know it's a little bit of a morning. I know lunch is next, but thank you, Lisa. My name is Rachel. I'm so excited to be here to be with you all today. Lisa said I'm the director of CVI Now, which is a big website about CVI. We follow the research and center the lived experiences of people with CVI and their families. And it's part of our big CVI initiative at Perkins School for the Blind, which is both a school and a big international NGO. I'm also a parent, like many of you. My son here, you can see him. His name is Henry. He's 11. He's going to start middle school in a few months, and I'm just not okay. And he is also a rare kid. He has an extremely rare genetic variant of the ASTN1 gene, which is responsible for sending neurons to their final position during fetal brain development, and currently is a community of one. I haven't met anybody else, so it's really special to be here with the CACNA 1A community. He has so many of the similar conditions that your kids have. He has CVI, he has nystagmus and other ocular conditions. He has chronic severe migraines, where he also loses speech for a while. Whoever asked that question, I'm like, yeah, that's Henry too. He has autism and intellectual disabilities and a lot of other conditions. And so when reading your stories, I also read a lot of your champion stories, and just so much resonated as a fellow disability parent, being in and out of the hospital, being dismissed by medical providers. That's a whole nother talk, isn't it? You know, having to just figure out how to live with the uncertainty, because there's always something next with our kids. We often don't know what it is, and it's really, really hard, and it's really hard to see our kids be in pain and suffer. So I'm with you, and I'm really honored to be here with you and talk about CVI. So, a little bit about what our work at Perkins. We're confronting CVI. It's the leading cause of blindness and low vision, and we're confronting it through education, innovation, collaboration. We want to equip the community with resources and tools and support so that people with CVI are empowered to meaningfully access the world and define their success. And we're whole child focused, we're research focused. And CVINow.org is a big part of this initiative. So today we're going to dive into CVI. I have a lot of information. We're going to talk about the current data and research. We're learning a lot from people with CVI. I'm very lucky the past few years. Adults and teenagers with CVI really found their collective voice. And when we hear from people with the condition, we learn so much more and how so much it impacts. We're going to talk a little bit about the visual behaviors. I want to talk about what access can look like, accommodations and some sample supports, and then next steps and resources. And I definitely want to hopefully have time for a Q&A. So first, I would love for all of us to look at this picture. And if you've seen this picture before, don't say it. But if you haven't, can anybody tell me what you see? What is this a picture of? Volleyball? Oh, that's the first I've heard that. Any other guesses? An eye? Oh, like a image of the eye, yeah. Marble tile? That's a good one. Okay, so I'm going to remove the background and orient it in the right way. Is this a little clearer what this is? You see that? Maybe add a little color to get the shape and the form. I use this because I want to show what it means to see something but not recognize it. And that's CVI, right? You may be able to see, but to not recognize or process or interpret what you're seeing, what does that even look like? What is it even? And so CVI is the difficulty of recognition, of visual recognition. And imagine living in a world that might look like this. I don't know if it does for some people with CVI, but maybe. So CVI is a brain-based visual impairment it's caused by damage or interruption to the visual pathways or visual processing areas of the brain. We see CVI common in rare condition communities like CACNA. CVI is characterized by functional vision problems. So when we say functional vision, it's how are you using your vision in the real world? That can't be adequately described by structural problems with the eye. Like even if our kids might have other ocular conditions, you might see some behaviors that can't be described by nystagmus, for example. The visual centers of the brain have difficulty processing and interpreting visual information. And so people with CVI struggle with visual attention, being able to look at things, visual recognition, being able to know what you're looking at, and it just results in a big lack of access and understanding of the world. And as I said, it's the leading cause. But even though it's the leading cause, it's still poorly understood and underdiagnosed. My son's CVI was missed until he was 5.5. You know, I spent 5 years or so being his mom and not knowing how much he was on the blindness spectrum. And we heard that behavior is communication. His behavior was communicating that he was not accessing the world, now that I learn. But it's very common in our community that CVI, you know, kids may not be diagnosed until they're teenagers or even early adulthood. We recently did partnered with McKinsey & Company to do the first of its kind US prevalence study of CVI, and they found that at least 180 kids with CVI in the US, but less than 20% have a diagnosis. That's a big deal. And 180,000 is just the tip of the iceberg. It's really hard to get healthcare data in our country since we don't have a nationalized healthcare system. So this is the beginning to really understand how prevalent CVI truly is. In UK, they did a recent study and found that 1 in 30 kids might have some type of CVI, brain-based related visual difficulty. That's 1 child in every classroom. And so we also found common associated conditions. Cerebral palsy, epilepsy is a big common associated condition with CVI. Of course, just anything that impacts the brain, right? Because we see with our brains, developmental delay, autism, genetic anomalies, and other conditions, HIE, brain injury, a whole host of genetic syndromes, including CACNA1A. We're finding it in Down syndrome as well. So it's, there's a lot of emerging prevalence research, and we're learning much more about where CVI is and how it's impacting our kids. It also can co-present with other ocular conditions. So a lot of our kids have other ocular conditions as well. But you can also have healthy eyes. You can have 20/20 vision and have CVI and be functionally blind. You'll not be able to get around in the world. What's really exciting is that CVI is a priority for the NIH. This is just recent. They have a whole new initiative. I was here in DC in November to be part of this workshop where they're establishing CVI diagnostic criteria, boosting awareness, and they're creating a CVI registry, which is really exciting. And with this registry, they want to collect a lot of data and co-occurring conditions, and so this is another way we can get our CACNA community in the NIH's orbit. Another study, Lisa. We love that. So when you think about CVI, you also have to learn about what is vision. You know, before my son, I didn't really know anybody who had low vision. I didn't really think about how we see. You know, it's a very unconscious task for many of us. And it's really, this is a really old analogy now that I'm thinking about it. Does anybody use thumb drives? But the eye to the brain is like a thumb drive to the computer, right? A thumb drive isn't really meaningful until you put it into its processing center, right? So Matt Tejan is the leader in the field. He's a TVI in Connecticut. He says, with CVI, the brain has difficulty converting raw data from the eye into reliable, meaningful image of the world that can be interpreted and acted upon. And so vision is built in the brain. CVI really affects the higher order visual processing areas. So we have information comes into the eye, it goes into the midbrain, our sensory gateway, then it starts going into the primarily visual cortex, which is back there in the occipital lobe. From there, it goes through 2 streams. The dorsal visual pathway goes through the parietal and the frontal lobe, which really involves finding items in space, helps you with visual motor skills, spatial orientation, visual attention. And then the information all goes through a ventral stream, which supports fine detail vision, visual recognition and object identification, recognizing faces and people, depth perception and route finding. And both of these streams are impacted with CVI. So if you have CVI, you're going to have difficulties in these areas, most likely. But for the visual system to fully work, both streams have to be highly integrated and share information. So if anything's going on with underconnectivity, difference in the brain, it's going to be a different system. And this picture, when I saw this first as a parent, it was the first time I'm like, oh my God. And this image, when I do trainings and show professionals, this is the one thing they're like, oh, I get it. CVI is a big deal. Because it can look like for many of our kids that they're looking, that they recognize things. You know, people think vision and blindness is just all or nothing, right? But we know, I'm sure many of you know with your kids, that vision can fluctuate, vision changes. And so here, this is from Dr. Lotfi Marabit. He's a leading CVI researcher at Harvard in the Boston area. So we have the control, and this is just the visual pathways in the brain is in the control. That's just the visual pathways. It's just the visual system in the brain. And then we have, this is one example of CVI. This isn't for everybody, but the big difference in the connectivity in the visual system. It's pretty profound. An adult with CVI has become a really great advocate. They have a blog called The CVI Perspective. They say, vision use is not passive, it's hard, tiring work. I see it with my son Henry all the time. And so the research is also starting to show this as well. These are just a bunch of images with kind of heat maps of where the eyes are looking. And so you see with the control, they're looking at different scenes of people in the environment. You know, for those who don't have CVI, they can find that person in the environment, and then those who do, look everywhere they're at, look at all the different places they're looking. That's the fatigue when it comes with visual search and trying to figure out where to look. And same thing, and this is Dr. Lotfi Marabit's work as well in the A and B, just having a simulated toy box. So with the control, they find the toy right away. With CVI, they're looking around, it takes a lot of time. And we're gonna talk a lot about fatigue. I love that you spoke about fatigue or SLPs because it's a huge one. And so what are we learning from people with CVI? We're learning, of course, our kids are the experts of their own brains, right? But it's taken me a long time to learn that as a parent, like how to take my child's lead and how to know what he needs and not being like, well, if I just do X, Y, and Z, things are gonna get better. But I've really had to learn how to be his best observer and figure out how he's accessing the world so then I can advocate for him. Like I said, vision use is hard work. Vision is unreliable. It can be affected by both internal, like how you're feeling inside, and also all the environmental stimuli. And that there are many ways to access information. Some use vision, some use non-visual skills, most use both. Our kids have incredible compensatory skills and strategies, and I want to talk kind of our theme, some big takeaways, like CVI is a big deal, but also about all the different strategies our kids are using to access the world and fill in those visual gaps. Because it doesn't take away from vision use. Oftentimes, for my son, he's a hugely tactile kid. He needs to have his tactile system going for him to be able to use his vision. So there's a lot that we can figure out with our kids. So we created just some kind of images and renderings that might just give us some idea of what CVI is like, because that's $1 million question. What does my child see? I can't answer that. I wish I could. But hopefully these are meant to just be empathy builders to really understand that, okay, it's complex. And so Nye shares that this is kind of what it looks like when they're not in a familiar place, right? Things just kind of mush together, almost kind of like the picture we started with. Light or certain colors may enter their awareness, but determining where one object is and ends can be difficult. Dagbor is an adult with CVI. They say that when they're rested and happy, they can see clearly except for their visual field loss. But when they're tired, their visual field goes down to that of a straw. And it can get fuzzy and not able to recognize what she was just looking at, and touch helps him recognize it again. Heat is a big hot topic in our CVI community. I don't know if you see this with your kids. When it's really hot, oh my God, Henry is just melts. But it affects his vision, affects all of his systems. For some with CVI, when it's hot out, they can't access their vision. Grace is she in middle school now? But she just shares, like, when she reads, she's learning how to read, but if she, she says that feels like her eyes are being pulled out from their centers, and she has a hard time reading long passages, and so she's a voracious audiobook reader. Albie, who has CVI and other disabilities as well, it's so interesting, but escalators are really difficult for me. I can't tell where the step is. I get really nervous. I have an anxiety attack. Right? Stopping on depth changes or stairs are a really big deal for a lot of our kids with CVI. He hates parades. They're very loud. They hurt his ears. I can't really tell where to go. I can't tell where the noise is coming from. And then clutter. We'll talk a lot about clutter today. I can't see anything in clutter. It's just a big mess. For people with CVI, it's hard to recognize faces. And so this is just an image of what that might be like. If you can't recognize a face, what are the other visual attributes that you might recognize? I know Henry doesn't make eye contact with me. He looks like he looks through me. I know before I knew I had CVI, I would walk to pick him up, and he would never recognize that I was there until I said something. And it's a lot to kind of come to terms with. My kid doesn't recognize me, but he does. He recognizes me in so many other ways. And then here's another, this is a student at Perkins was sharing that they use color as a way to help recognize and remember particular people or objects. And this is just a rendering of, like, if you can only use color to recognize the world, and that's a relative strength for many people with CVI, what might that be like? It's a very ghostly image. Okay. Am I talking too fast? No, we're good? We like the pace? Okay. So I want to go and talk about the CVI visual behaviors. This is based on current research in the field. This is based on the work of some of our leaders at Perkins with assessing a whole wide range of students. It's also based on other leading theorists' work, and it really broadens deepens our understanding of CVI. So I know this is a big, busy graphic. We're not going to talk about all of them today, but we're going to dive into some of them. But this is also a framework for assessment. And so we think about CVI, we look at the difficulty with visual attention and recognition. We look at difficulty form accessibility. You heard that here from our SLP presentation. What is the most accessible form? 3D, two-dimensional, what type of two-dimensional, picture versus symbolic? Response interval is really that wait time. How long does it take them to visually attend to something that's presented? And then how long does it take to recognize as well? Impact of color. Color is a relative strength for many people with CVI. It really is a way to help them recognize an unrecognizable visual world. Light can be both a support for visual attention, but it also can be distracting and disorienting. Motion is really fascinating to me. Many with CVI can't process fast motion, so they miss people coming towards them, or bikes, or cars. I was like, how is Henry going to cross that street on his own? I don't know if it's ever, anyway. But we also live in motion, but motion can also be a support. So if you slowly move something in front of your child's face, that might alert them that something's there. If any of us just kind of been working out our window and we see something moving in the corner of our eye, we look, right? It's part of our visual system. So it can be an alerting, it can be a support. We're going to talk about clutter, but it's really visual clutter. It's simultaneous visual information. Visual field, many people with CVI have visual field loss. Lower visual field is really common, but also any other visual field as well. And we see that based on the environment, based on how you're feeling, it can actually change the visual field. Visual curiosity has to do with kind of being aware of what's at a distance, that distance vision. Sensory integration is the impact of vision with multisensory inputs. We'll talk about that. Access to people is all about recognition of people and just the impact of social skill development. Visual guidance of upper or lower limbs is the impact of visual motor skills. And then we also look at the appearance of eyes and the movement of eyes. So that was a big list. Let's dive deeper. And as we dive deeper, before that, let's talk about compensatory skills. Everybody with CVI, we know that so many with CVI have workarounds or strategies for everything because they can't rely on their vision. There's visual gaps, or their vision cuts out because they're tired. So context is one of them, where, I'm in the kitchen and I see a long, shiny thing. It might be a spoon or a fork, using that contextual memory to help them recognize. Memory, they might memorize the layout of a room so they can get around easier in a familiar place. But what if you move your furniture around? What happens next? Predictability, using when things are in predictable places, they know where to go, they know where to look. That routine. Color coding is a huge skill as I spoke about. Touch, smell, auditory cues, those verbal labels. There's so many great verbal labels in the SLP presentation before, but I feel like I'm a radio parent for Henry, just always like, all right, I'm walking upstairs, because sometimes he doesn't know when I leave the room, and he gets really freaked out, and so I have to tell him, I'm leaving, I'm coming back. Okay, so let's start diving into a few of these. And when I dive in, I also want to talk about what this might look like. And maybe this resonates with you and your experience, and just some things to observe. So with visual attention, it's that difficulty with fixation, with shifting eye gaze, with visual search. And so it could be trouble looking at something that's pointed at a distance. I don't see my son look up at all often. I'm like, oh, look up at the trees, and he just doesn't know quite where to look. Bring an object very close to their eyes to see it. Tilt their head in a certain position to see something. Notice something only when it moves or lights up. A vision appears inconsistent or appears to touch or listen before showing visual interest. And so I have a video of Sally. She has a rare disease, Ogden syndrome, and just to kind of show what her visual attention is like when she's interacting with this snack.
Good girl.
Right? Do we notice where her visual attention went? Was it on the snack? No, not quite, right? But she was using a lot of those other compensatory skills, really touching, listening, maybe moving it around to hear it. And gosh, she's so big right now. This is when she was really little. But just an example of what might look like with using those compensatory skills to, and to engage in tasks. So visual recognition, as I said, is a big part of CVI, and that's difficulty processing and interpreting and recognizing what you're looking at. And it's important to understand that looking doesn't automatically represent understanding and processing. It's really important to understand with our kids. And so it could be difficult to recognize objects, pictures, words, letters, numbers, and other symbols, people, places, parts of the environment, right? Varying abilities to access different learning materials. Are they really need only real objects to learn? Can pictures and other two-dimensional abstract or symbolic learning materials work? And at times, recognition is solely dependent on those compensatory skills: color coding, tactile, auditory. And so I'm going to show you a video of oh, no, not yet. Okay, so thinking about recognition. Can anybody think of a word that rhymes with this picture? Right, we see this picture. Oh, no, yeah, that's okay. What rhymes with wishbone? No. Is it a wishbone? I honestly don't. I've always thought this was like a dog's nose. I don't know what it is. But we're all kind of like, if your child was asked to do a learning task based on a visual material that they can't access or process or recognize, what are the assumptions that are going to be made? And hopefully the first assumption is maybe they're not visually accessing this, right? So I think it's really important when we talk about visual access, we connect it to all things: learning, communication, whole child development. Here's Dagbort said, "This sums up how I see in a new place." This is some abstract painting. I'm like, what? That's wild. It's complex. Here's Henry now. So he's, this is a long time. This is before he was okay getting haircuts. So he's got those beautiful sideburns here. But he's trying to find, I think, some teddygrams somebody gave him at school, and just kind of showing kind of where his recognition piece.
I don't know how to do.
Keep looking. Keep searching, Henry. Do you have teddygrams?
Yoda,
No.
but
Is that yogurt? What is that?
that piece.
Okay, keep searching. Those teddygrams are in there. You put them in
Very
there.
tactile.
They didn't have them today.
Yeah,
So he's making
you
up some
you did
stories.
have them today. Keep searching.
Yeah. But is he visually looking, right?
Keep going. Keep searching.
And this is it's a cluttered, this lunchbox is quite
I
cluttered.
don't think the teddy
He doesn't think they're there.
are in here.
You don't think they're in here?
But teethers are in
Yeah.
here.
They're in here, Henry.
I don't think they are.
They are.
Teethers are just very don't nothing.
Keep searching.
Oh.
Pencils. That is
Okay, there we go.
Found out.
So just really thinking about, just to show that, knowing like he's using so many other skills besides just looking. Like he could have found those teddygrams in like a second, right? But because he's impacted with CVI and other ocular conditions, it takes time and he needs to use a lot of other skills. And to also think about how we all have this visual library. I have another daughter, I have another child who doesn't have CVI or other disabilities, and she's able to see something once and then recognize it in all its forms. And with CVI, it really greatly impacts building that visual library. Oh, I'm getting a nod from Lindley. Yes, right, that's used for recognition. And we all have this, which is mind-blowing to me, right? We know what something is despite changes in viewpoint or shape or variability in cause and movement, changes in size, positioning, changes in lighting, different color, different textures, if it's 3D or 2D. And so this is an example from Ellen Maisel, who's, I work with a Perkins and a leader in the field, like, we have duckness. We can recognize that all of these pictures are ducks. For somebody with CVI, that can be very, very difficult. They might know that rubber ducky, and that's their only visual form of rubber ducky that they know. They can't generalize it to a ducks in the environment, or a 2D picture of that duck. And so I think that's one of the things that really has helped me as a parent advocate for my son is there's a lot of need for repetition and direct instruction and starting all learning and therapies in something that they deeply know and are familiar with. Yes, thank you. No, I love it. I love the feedback. So clutter. Clutter is like public enemy number one for people with CVI, and the world is clutter. And it's difficulty looking and recognizing and navigating cluttered environments. And so they might have difficulty being able to look and recognize with clutter when objects are spaced too closely together or when there's an unpredictable arrangement. They have a hard time with visually sorting and just perceiving when lots of items compete for their attention, right? Our visual system knows what to ignore and what to look at. For people with CVI, it can be hard to know what to look like when there's too many things to look at. They might only be able to see one thing at a time. This is, in the science, it's called simultanagnosia. And so I've heard from people with CVI with that when they're presenting or when they're out looking in a crowd, they might only be able to see like one face and not recognize that there's so many other people in the room. And it's just better able to see an object against a simple backdrop, which we saw from yours as well. I have that same black silicone mat. I use it for everything, right, Henry? So here's just a simulation. This is not my kitchen, somebody's nice kitchen, but just showing like what normal clutter might be, right? There's the snacks, there's the iPad, there's my coffee, there's some dishes, and this would be clutter. This would be a cluttered surface for somebody with CVI. And so say they want to find that blue cup, and what might that visual search pattern look like? When we know that with an increased visual load, this is from Dr. Maribet, individuals with CVI have to grind it out, which eventually leads to frustration and anxiety, and that perpetuates through the day, causing this vicious cycle of fatigue and stress. And this is something called the serial processing. Like many folks who are sighted have something called parallel processing, where we can instantly take in all the visual information at once and act on it. For people with CVI, it's like that they go through the world using serial processing, where they're scrutinizing one piece of information at a time when there's more sensory information to take in, and that's just a less efficient form of visual search. So if a child wanted to find that blue cup, they might they may see that blue, but oh, it's the iPad. They may find that yellow Pop-It, lots of great colors on this counter. They might find that bowl of popcorn. They might see their snack plate. Then they might see some more blue, and then they find the cup. And just using that search every time they need to find something, it's no wonder I see Henry just touching or just asking where things are, because it's tiring to have to do that over and over and over again. And it can lead to the brain being overloaded. We hear from people that it gets fuzzy or things can look like a fun house. And these are just abstract representations and just one person's experience. And so what could be clutter in a classroom environment? We have, I was a former special educator, and I taught some kids with CVI. I didn't even know they had it, So knowing what my desk might look like, and that might be their background. If they think this child is trying to count some chips, and that's their clutter background, visual access is going to be very difficult. The top one with the feeding setup, even that clutter behind them can be really distracting. And mealtime, I know for Henry, he also had a hard time. He was also very low weight for a lot of his life. He still is. And eating was really, really difficult. And for him, we learned that it had to be very quiet. We put a black trifold in front of him, and we realized that his CVI was really impacting his ability to focus on just eating for more than 10 seconds at a time. This is an example from Henry's kindergarten classroom. They're like, oh, look, we put up a black trifold. But from his point of view, what else? Is there still clutter in his viewpoint, right? Absolutely. And even the worksheets and all of that. And so it's so important to really get in our child level and see, what are they seeing, what's in their space, why are they overwhelmed right now, why can't they look at this learning material? And oftentimes it might just be there's too much visual information for them to process. Other examples of clutter, I know this is an AAC device, but you spoke a lot about adapting the device for the individual needs. And there's so many different ways you can adapt a device where it's not too visually overwhelming. I love the ideas of using real pictures. Really, it's so important that if your child has CVI and other ocular issues, that along with the speech and language assessment, there should also be some type of communication between the teacher of the visually impaired and the SLP to really understand what's the most accessible. Thanks for the head nods. But don't get me started about worksheets. Our educational system relies on the fact that that learning is visual. And so for our kids where that can't be all the time, it's a lot of advocacy work we have to do on the parents' part. And so what might this look like with difficulty in recognition and clutter, right? Not notice new items or toys. Christmas and birthdays are a very different ballgame for us. He's like, okay, one new thing, that's all. That's all I need. Or it's just not the best. It's not what, you'd expect. They only recognize well-known items in a very familiar setting, but not outside of the context. Hard time recognizing those 2D images. Lose things that drop on the ground. Once things are dropped, Henry's like, it's gone. I don't know where it is. Trouble finding things that are in a new or cluttered spot. We have if things aren't in a specific place, he's like, where is it? And he doesn't have the visual search pattern to go around and look for it. Trouble missing things in certain fields or need verbal cues to find something. Trouble navigating routes and spaces, and using color, touch, and sound to memory are the main supports to know what something is. Access to people is a big one. Not being able to recognize faces, facial expressions, gestures, body language. For a long time, when I got angry, Henry would laugh at me. And I learned it's probably because he didn't see my body language, my facial expression, and my voice probably just sounded really funny. And how do you navigate that as a parent when you want to show him, this is not okay, you can't do this, and it's been a whole long learning journey. But I think it's such a big impact on developing those social skills, on developing those communication skills as well. And so what this might look like, mistaking a stranger for a family member. Henry's gone up and touched so many men's legs in Target and other places, or he's gone up to mannequins. Only recognizing someone when they hear their voice. Trouble pointing out familiar people in photos. Might not return a smile. Have trouble making eye contact. Miss gestures like a high five or a handshake. And not able to find someone in a group of people or a crowd. And so from students with CVI, we're hearing that I can't see pedestrians moving. I quite likely bump into them, or suddenly there's a person in my face and I'm still walking and I have no idea what to do. It can be very stressful. I know mirrors work in logic, and that's how I know it's me when I look in a mirror. But imagine all of those self-care skills of being able to rely on, looking at yourself in the mirror. And this Lego image where there's no faces on these Legos, and the student said that this is a wonderful example of how I see and remember people. I can see everybody about them except their faces. When I'm at a party, I'll see people, but I won't see their faces, so it's very hard to me to know who they are. And so I always tell Henry's school team, just everybody say, hi, it's, Ms. Reisman. I'm here to do X, Y, and Z. And I love that you said don't quiz them, because I hear people like, oh, you know who I am. I'm like, no. For some reason, he's not saying your name. He's not recognizing you right away. Don't make him do that work. And so it's not a game. Sensory integration is difficulty using vision with other sensory inputs. And it's a big one. It's a big one for our kids. And so the ability, what can impact ability to use vision, right? Noisy and busy environments, distracting movement, lights or sounds, listening to audio input, right? Not being able to look and listen at the same time. When they're physically challenged. My son also has hypotonia. And so when he's not in a supportive position, if his body's really tired, it's going to be hard for him to access his vision or even learning tasks in general. When they're touching, they're not able to look at the same time, perhaps. When it's too hot or too cold. And also if they're just not okay. When they're sick, pre and post seizure, stressed, hungry, migraine. You know, my son his vision is not online. It takes a while for his vision to get online after his migraine episodes. He actually had an ophthalmology appointment like 24 hours after he had a big migraine. And they all got really concerned, like, he can't see anything. I'm like, no, this is CVI. His brain is not available to use his vision right now because of his episode, so. And Nicola McDowell is an adult with CVI who's also a big researcher. She's in New Zealand. I actually just met her. We had a CVI conference in June at Perkins. And she has a blog, and just what I know so many of the adults, you know, it's like, well, that's so far from my kid's experience, but they can really give us so much insight into how deeply CVI impacts. But really just saying, going through a school day, the clutter, the overload of sensory information, the constant noise, the smells in classrooms, she spent the whole day feeling anxious and on edge. And we know what it's like to have a really anxious day, what that does to your whole body system. And she said it was just exhausting, and to survive each day, she had to have this quiet time, these breaks, the solitary timeouts, just to deal with that anxiety and confusion. And so these proactive breaks are really so important for many of our kids with CVI. And so what might that visual fatigue look like? And you probably all have your own knowing of what fatigue looks like in your child. It could be rubbing their eyes, putting their heads down, getting overly quiet or non-responsive, fatigued, irritable after using vision for a certain amount of time, overwhelmed, upset, meltdowns, especially in loud or busy places. Henry would just like drop down to the floor, and I couldn't get him to move, you know, in these busy places sometimes. They're just overwhelmed, or they might appear overly tired or have a physical response. Headaches, migraines, nausea, dizziness. We hear that this is lots of physical responses to when they're overwhelmed visually. And then visual guidance of limbs, the effective visual motor tasks that involve eye-hand and eye-foot use. And so they might not reach and look at the same time. It might not look while eating. Eating can be a really hard task for many with CVI because of all of the CVI behaviors and how they impact access to eating. They might touch a surface before placing something down. They might trip or move in their wheelchair over easily visible things or bump into furniture, get in front of moving objects. Like Henry was walking right in front of moving swings. Yes? It's like, no. So because they can't process that fast motion, it's not even registered. Trouble moving through crowds, trouble with change, like, you know, changing environment. But then also difficulty going around ramps, you know, maybe pausing before a change in depth, or they might drag their heels or tap their toes as they go down steps. And so I want to show you 2 videos of Henry kind of navigating changes in the ground and the surface. So this first one, this is before we knew he had CVI. He's a baby here. But you see it goes from the wood chips to the grass. And he did this a lot, even like when it was just a carpet to the wood floor. He would do this. He would get to that change and then just like sit down and navigate it. Because is it a depth? He doesn't know, right? He made it. He's so little. And then for this, just kind of looking at the compensatory skills of traveling downstairs. And even if your child's a wheelchair user, like what do they do when they're going, there's a change in depth, up or down? Are they relying on something? And so here, I don't think there's any sound, but like they slide their heels along the step. They rely on the railing. And then at the very end of the stairs, yep, there it is. They're going to toe tap. He's going to make sure that there's no other stairs left, right? And so this is, I didn't really notice this until I learned this from other CVI experts. Like this is a way to understand, like, okay, he's not using his vision to guide him through depth. And once we kind of are able to observe these skills and how they're working their way through the world, we learn so much about what our kids need. Okay. How's everybody doing? That was a lot. Good? Okay. We're going to talk about access and some sample accommodations and supports. Okay. So we have a lot of design tools for our kids to access their learning. First, it always needs to start with autonomy and agency and choice. And that comes, you heard a lot about choice models, total communication. A calendar system is a great way to model, to help kids build agency, to understand what's coming up next. And auditory, lots of auditory supports that can be used, text-to-speech, screen readers, audiobooks, but just those verbal descriptions. Movement, that kinesthetic is part of learning, and so how do you make movement as a part of learning for a child? Tactile, lots of tangible items. Braille, Henry's learning both Braille and print. You see him using a white cane to navigate. And there's lots of visual design tools, color and spacing and reduced clutter and different environmental supports, lights. And then, of course, collaboration I see as a design tool, is how to make an accessible school day for our kids. And it's hard. It's hard with collaboration with school teams when there's so much for them to learn about your child. But of course, it all needs to start with assessments. All needs to start with assessments, right? Because we can have, I'm going to do CVI for this child, but it's not going to work, right? Success looks very different across our massive heterogeneous population. So we have a lot of assessments available for CVI. Perkins is creating a new assessment, which is coming out very soon. It's much more broader and comprehensive. We know Dr. Roman's CVI range, and there's others. But also a learning media assessment is something that a teacher of the visually impaired does. And it specifically looks at what are the learning materials that are accessible for your child, and what are the different sensory systems that are going to be used for access. Do they need more tactile approach? And what does the presentation need to look like? As well as looking at expanded core curriculum, which is, I'm not going to get into that today, but for students with blindness and low vision, it's a whole nother set of learning that helps them just kind of level the playing field. We learn so much by observation. And so with the expanded core curriculum, there's a lot more direct instruction in literacy, in everyday life skills, for example. And then an orientation mobility evaluation has to do with how they can safely navigate around. And wheelchair users need to also have an O&M evaluation as well. It's not just for kids who are walking on their feet. It's everybody has a right to safely learn how to navigate their environment, no matter how they move through it. And so we also just need to think about the root of accessibility. What's the learning goal? What are the strengths we can use to build those new skills? How can we incorporate experiential learning? What are the CVI supports needed? But then what are the multisensory approaches as well, and how are they going to show their learning? And so just some recommendations for general CVI supports. This might, you might see these before, but really maintain that predictable and organized environment. Everything has a place. Reduce that visual clutter in the learning space. And here are just some examples on the screen. You see how much easier it is to focus on that teacher when they're behind a very simple black background. You see a meal setup. You see I think that's a window. I don't know what's block there, maybe a window or some type of cluttered board. Reduce that noise and distracting light, reduce that movement as well. And these are the conditions that might only be needed when you're learning a new concept, right? We can't have this specific environment for our kids all the time, but when they're learning something new, when they're trying something new, thinking about the conditions that they need to be okay for that learning. Supportive positioning is huge for our kids. And then also how we can leverage that color and contrast to really build that pop-out effect and support visual attention. And so just some examples of different environmental supports using color to help navigate steps, a simple room. I think this is Henry's room. There's nothing on the wall that I don't have to decorate, but just because I want it to be a very kind of a respite space where he can go and relax. Using some color guides to help move through space. Lots of different creative ways to reduce clutter and just build that really simple space for learning. Some more examples of, things you can do around the house, because, I can't Marie Kondo my house. Our house is normal. But we do just have very simple spaces. Like there's some spaces where there's nothing on the walls, we have patterned carpets. He's familiar with that. But when it comes to, when he eats, when he wants to do he loves trains. He's a big train obsessed kid. When he wants to watch his videos, we always do it in a place where it's a simple environment. And using color is such a great way to just start incorporating some supports for our kids. But see that remote, that has been, those colored silicone circles have been so helpful for Henry. That's where he places the remote, that's where we also have one for where he places his glasses. And so just kind of thinking about some simple color supports that can build that independence and agency. And then for actual learning tasks, like our kids require specialized learning. They require specialized learning, and everybody needs to be on board with that, and it needs to be individualized. Our kids benefit from a multisensory approach. Even those who primarily use vision with CVI, there's going to be times where they're fatigued and can't access vision. So how are they going to still access their learning when vision is not there or available? And so it's really important that we have everything in place. And also, how do we get them through the school day without being so fatigued? And often it's creating a multisensory way into learning, using real objects, using movement versus always having them use their vision over and over and over again. Making sure it's an accessible field, allowing students to focus on one task or sensory input-output at a time, right? Listening only, looking only, touching only. Reduce that visual clutter, that's a big theme, and show maybe one thing at a time. For some, maybe it's just they can see 2 things at a time or 3 things at a time, but it's just knowing what works for the child. Color and contrast, intentional use of light. iPads or backlit devices, which I've seen some of your kids use, are really a good support and allow that wait time. Just some examples here. I hate worksheets so much. And so these are just, we have a great article about adapting worksheets on CVI Now, but just some ways where you could take, a worksheet and put it in and using all of these supports, right? And so this is an all-in-one board through American Printing House for the Blind, but you're using color, it's a tactile, it's still visual, but a lot of different CVI supports there in place. Here's a worksheet. What's with these designs? Anyway, that you could bring it on an iPad and just reduce that clutter, add some light, that backlighting and color. And just some examples of light. You can use that task lighting with the purple and choice making. You can add light to a feeding utensil to support that. Here's a child in the middle. This is Logan. He's using his AAC device as a keyboard for a learning task there to fill an O as top. Light can be really used in so many creative ways to support that attention. Here's some examples of Henry's adapted learning. They did this kind of like all about me web in 4th grade. And, you see that it's both tactile, but also very visually simple. So you can really think of multiple sensory systems at the time. He's able to both tactually access it and visually as well. The Muffin Tin is such a great device. I think he's using this. Math can be really hard for a lot of our kids with CVI. It affects some of the similar visual areas, but this is for graphing. And so you can use muffin tins for so many different things, sorting and subitizing and adding and subtracting. And I know, almost there, just a little bit about Henry's path to literacy. It's been really hard. Learning is really hard. He needs a lot of repetition. Even with CVI supports, he has a difficult time with recall and memory. He has a lot going on. And so his schedule, his calendar system was really one of the first ways that helped him understand connecting that symbols to language to meaning. And so you'll see, I don't know what directions are, but his calendar system has that black background, and the fork is, I think, eating. That is a band from close that's changing, and then the toothbrush is getting, brushing teeth. So that's his morning routine, and we did that a lot at home. And this is during, you can see the virtual learning. This is during the shutdown, but they really used his calendar system to help him connect to then begin understanding that literacy and words. So this is his way into literacy. So he knew that that was the bus symbol, and eventually he could recognize that in a 2D form, and then eventually he could connect that to the word bus, and then he had a very experiential memory for that word bus. So from there, he's learning both print and Braille. It's taking a lot of time. He's not like, oh, I'm going to pick up a book and read, right? It's still very hard for him, but he loves riding the train. We ride the train in Boston every weekend. I never knew I would know so much about trains for my child, but when our kids have an interest, I can't believe that his love for trains has been his gateway into learning. And so I'm just so grateful for that. And so his TVI has adapted all these different books based on his train rides, because he has such an experiential memory. He feels it, he knows what it feels like, he knows the sounds, and so he has so much meaning and memory to bring to a very visually difficult thing for him to process. A little bit about Next Step and resources. I know CVI is part of the CACNA community, but if you suspect it, really ask a trusted medical provider to refer you to an ophthalmologist or a neuro-ophthalmologist or optometrist. We have a growing doctors directory of those who can diagnose CVI. It's so hard to find doctors. And also take videos of your child, of how they're functioning in the world and how they're using their vision and not using their vision. And they can also document the need for services at EI and in the school system. And while you wait to be evaluated, if you don't have a CVI diagnosis yet, you can still ask your school system to do CVI assessments, to do functional vision assessments. And CVI Now, I just want to talk about, we have so much on this website to help and support your journey. We have a lot about, we have a whole series on calendar systems. We have a whole series on AAC and CVI and communication, but a lot of deep resources for families and caregivers and professionals to explore. We also have a Facebook group that's a really rich and safe space. And we have a one-to-one call program. So if you want to call and talk to Lacey, she's on my team. She's a CVI parent. Her child has a rare condition also, but she's also a teacher visually impaired. So if you have questions, we have a call program as well. And I just want you to know that your community is our community, and our community is your community. And I'm really excited to be here and to be a part of your community. And thank you. We have a newsletter if you want to stay in touch with us. We have an Instagram. Do we have time for questions? A few?
I think we have about 5 minutes for questions. Is that right? We have an online question that we were going to start with, I think. So this person writes, my son, 19, has CVI. He cycles on a large tricycle, and he can only cycle on familiar roads. Now he would like to have a mobility scooter. Could he also learn this regarding his sight? The speed is higher, and should we practice on familiar routes just like cycling, or is it really too dangerous given the speed?
Oh, that's a great question. If they're comfortable, my son also has a tricycle that he rides, and it's amazing how he can navigate, things that I didn't think. For some with CVI, movement provides kind of a sense of seeing, but is there a way that you can cap the speed on a new automated wheelchair at first? Yes, that's the first question. And to practice that on that lower speed in very familiar environments. And then I think it's just that scaffolded learning. But yeah, of course, our kids can do anything. It's just kind of getting the right scaffolds and supports in place. But then also, if you have an orientation and mobility instructor that you could work with to help them learn different skills, if they're not using their vision, other skills that they can use to navigate safely in an unknown environment. I hope that answers the question.
Right here. Hi, sorry.
Hi.
I'm hoping you can speak to, I think it's called a VEP test.
Yep.
And the reason for this question is, in your last slide, you were talking about, getting advocacy for our kids. And so our optometrist through the district performed a VEP test. Yes, she has CVI. Great. Good to know. What are the resources? Our pedi neuro-ophthalmologist says, no, she does not have CVI, and a VEP test is not a reliable assessment tool. And so what do you do when you have two really well-educated doctors who are saying different things? We're operating as if she does have CVI, and so she still receives those services. But I'm wondering if you can sort of speak to the VEP assessment or test.
I'm sorry, you're caught in between that. There isn't established agreed upon diagnostic criteria, right? And so VEP hasn't been found through research to be a reliable test for CVI. It's really based on history, of course, associated conditions. There's some screeners in place, like Teach CVI screener. And so I would go back to the person who used, the optometrist, was it, who did the VEP? It's like, what else besides the VEP did to call them to suspect and diagnose CVI? I mean, it can show things going on, right? But it's hard for you to be, I wish those two would talk to each other and not put you in the middle of it. But it's like, don't we have a lot of things to do? But I think also to the ophthalmologist who thinks that they don't have CVI, that's kind of where you're like, well, here are the common visual behaviors, and this is what I see. And I did this. You can go on. It's called Teach CVI, and you can go on and take that screening yourself. And I did this, and they're high risk for CVI. But I think if you suspect it, and if the support's in place for CVI are already working for your child, then diagnosis is really important.
Thank you.
Good question. Oh, this medical system. Yeah.
Hi, I want to thank you for a phenomenal presentation. We are just brand new to CVI. Yeah.
Take your time.
So the little guy behind
Is
you
that
who's
him?
been adding his comments throughout
love
your
it.
talk.
What's his name?
John.
John. Hi, John.
So he has hemiplegic migraine. After multiple severe ones, he appeared to have CVI that was transient, which is kind of weird because his vision came back. When he was 12, he developed epilepsy, and ever since he's having consistent seizures, his world has completely shut down.
Visually.
Visually. And the problem is he's non-speaking, non-ambulatory.
Yeah.
So he's really, and he used his eyes to communicate. So we're at the point, I honestly wish the last talk and your talk were together, because right now he's locked in. He cannot communicate with us. So do you have any recommendations on, and like I said, what you said in your talk about some days or some moments seeing better than others, we see that all the time.
Yeah.
Post-seizure, there's nothing,
But that's CVI. Yeah. Right.
Clearly. So thank you for explaining all that, because his world seems much clearer to us now from hearing you. But just any recommendations on, because he was using an eye gaze that he was just starting to not make great strides, but at least look at when this all started. So do you have any recommendations, being that he's so limited, so that he can communicate a little bit better?
Have you explored other sensory systems that he prefers? Like, is he a tactile? Does he prefer tactile, auditory?
Auditory, very much.
Okay.
But just trying to get those connections where he can kind of tell us what he's thinking. He'll listen. Yeah, he's telling us right now.
What's he saying?
No,
I don't want to answer, Lindley, for the communicator. Yeah.
But maybe I should take this as a one-off after
Yeah.
the talk and talk to you both. But
Yeah.
that is our biggest challenge right now.
That's a big challenge.
And we just feel so badly because, he gets frustrated.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big one. But of course, there's so many ways to communicate, even if vision is not available. And yeah, let's connect about that, because I know so many students at Perkins are using auditory scanning assist. Yeah, thank you. Many with CVI use motor memory, so they use that guard a lot to support as well. And then also they use just tactile choice boards. So there's so many ways in and ways out. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
I think this will be our last question.
And I'll be here during lunch.
Hi, so my daughter hasn't been diagnosed yet with this, but it sounds like her.
Yeah.
And we always get that she claws her feet. And anytime she's going downstairs, her toes will go in. If she's going on different surfaces or going on the balance beam, PT, OT, we see that. And they're like, oh, it's just sensory. She likes the feeling of it. But do you think, after listening to your talk, this could be connected with CVI and visual? Because she has all other visual things, too.
Oh, yeah, it could be. I wonder if that's just a response, feeling really anxious. We hear from people with CVI when they step down a curb, they're like, they don't know how deep it is. They're just going to go. It's just jumping into the abyss. And so we can imagine our own physical response. So I wonder, that could be, I'm sure that visual guidance piece could be that as well. My son also claws his feet. So yeah, his feet are kind of funky. But yeah, I think that's a really great question to continue to explore. What if you did a color target? What if it was a really quiet environment? What if it was a really small, just kind of changing different conditions and seeing what the response is will give you more information if it's more visual than not.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I know. Yeah, I wonder that too, because Henry also has balance issues as well. But the hypotonia, like muscle control, is really it's so hard to see when one ends and the other begins, right? Because it's all so interconnected. But I think so. If you don't have a good sense of the visual space, that proprioception, you don't have that feedback. How much we rely on visual feedback to hold our bodies up? It's a lot. It's a really good point. I know. PT perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
Those are those really intrinsic muscles and their feet that they're relying on to get that proprioception and that balance.
Oh.
And so they're using another sensory mechanism
Yep.
to cope with that visual loss or even that balance loss. So they're integrating literally everything from a physical perspective just to gain that control or accomplish that task that you're asking them to do. And for me as a PT, it's crucial to develop those skills. So like we're in the clinic or I'm bringing therapeutic tools into your house, but I also find it critically important to train them in real life. So like if we're working on curbs, we need to go outside. Like we need to work on those actual surfaces. So take a trip to the playground, take a trip outside, use your resources in real life at the same time. Even in the same session, it's critically important to get those synapses like formed in their
That real world learning,
that you're not just using your vision, you're using literally every sensory system. Proprioception, proprioception in a sense that maybe you guys don't know the meaning to that, but like the sense of how their body feels in space and what their kinesthetic is taking in and out. Does that make sense? So they're literally relying on adapting their environment to what they know and how they feel.
So good. Yeah. Thank you for that. We should wrap up, right? Thank you, guys.